Hello, everybody. I see a red light over here flashing. That means we are live, and we are live with a wonderful panel. I'm very happy to be with three wonderful speakers today. So welcome everyone to our panel, In Good Company, the role of big companies committed to a carbon neutral future. That's the topic we are going to talk about. My name is Andreas Kuhlmann. I'm CEO of the German Energy Agency. So that energy agency, which is kind of organizing and setting up this SET project together with the World Energy Council. Today, we talk with some industry experts about decarbonization in the large business world, how they are doing it, and what are some of the challenges. And I'm very happy that we have, I can say, pretty different kinds of industries on board today. One analyzer, one about software, kind of, and one about the old industry, which is not that old anymore, as we will see in a few minutes. We know that amidst the growing political and public demand to reduce and eliminate carbon dioxide emissions, large industry players are taking notice and they're taking action. The question is why? Is it greenwashing? I don't think so. There's so much going on. But what is the specific reason to recognize that something is going on? Is it just the economic risk they are seeing, or is it also the economic chance for future business models? We will see what our panel is going to tell us about this. This is why many large companies anyway have begun pledging to become carbon net zero by 2030, 2050, or even sooner. But what does it mean, carbon net zero? That's also a very difficult question, I think. So a big thank you to the panelists we have with us today. I would like to just welcome you, the following speakers, just mentioning the names, and in my first question later on, I will ask you to tell me something about you. First one is Kingsmill Bond, energy strategist at Carbon Tracker. I think most of us know Carbon Tracker. It's a very good organization, company. Vanessa Miller-Fels, Director of Energy Innovation and Impact. Oh, I'm so sorry, Vanessa. It's Vanessa Miller-Fels, not Fels. It's very important because I just asked you about your name. And you're Director of Energy Innovation and Impact at Microsoft. And then we have Sophia Nadur, Global eMobility Innovation Director with BP, British Petroleum. I think that's a great panel, and we see that two of you have innovation in their title, which is very good. I like innovation, and there must be some reason here. Well, in the first round, maybe really just a few words. So let me start with you, Sophia. But tell us a little bit what made you come to BP.
So I'm Sophia. So as you said, I work as the innovation lead within BP. I don't have a technology background. My background is in consumer insights and innovation, pure innovation. The tech is cool, but really and truly understanding what customers want and need, and how do we nudge behavior, nudge change in the way people move, the way people choose energy and also consume energy. And that's why I came to BP, because I felt like there was an opportunity, a window opening up for us to look at differently, and also look differently as well to solutions. So yes, of course, we're a big technology company, but now increasingly we don't have all the answers. And also, how do we engage and build that bridge even bigger with the ecosystem, many of whom I think have the answers. And so that's my passion, and that's why I've come into BP to help BP with the purpose to become a net zero company.
But was it a new focus for BP when you brought in all this customer ideas and thinking?
No, I mean BP has been serving 10 million customers every day in the gas station. So the interface with customers is not new, but it's going beyond these, what I call the traditional services that are being delivered for many years, and opening up both internally but also with customers as well, being able to push them into new areas and to offer new services that actually are helping them to improve energy utilization, but also help them to nudge into better transport modes, for instance. instance, from ICE
Right.
vehicles to electric vehicles, etc.
All right. Thank you. Vanessa, what made you come to Microsoft?
That's a great question. So I come from a public sector background. I worked in the French Ministry of Energy and Finance on climate change negotiation. And when family reasons brought me to the US, I was just like, what are the big energy questions that are coming up in the world in the next, 10, 15, 20 years? And I joined Microsoft 5 years ago when the data center industry was growing quite big, but wasn't as big as it is today. And so I think it has been quite an interesting bet and kind of journey for me, but also for Microsoft over the last 10 years as the question of energy sourcing and climate change has become much more of a focus for the IT sector at large, due obviously to the capabilities we have in-house, just kind of how can we use our data intelligence, but also obviously due to public policy, consumer demand, and I like what Sophia just said about being consumer focused. I think this is at the end of the day, it will come to that. When we figure out the solutions for climate change, the consumer is at the center, and whether it's a individual or whether it's a corporation, I think it's quite critical for Microsoft and how we think about climate change and how we deliver change in-house, like within our own operation or with our customers, like BP, with whom we've just announced a big partnership. So yeah, a bit of a public-private partnership is kind of my go-to.
Yeah, well, I mean, with that background in politics, I mean, to know how politics is running, is it helpful for your job?
Very helpful. And this is one thing that's also, I think, quite a learning for Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft has always, since the 90s, has been very close in with policymakers and understanding kind of the importance of policymaking. But in climate change, it's going to be hand-in-hand solutions. And it's particularly relevant when we are looking at the EU right now with the European Green Deal, the recovery plans, and all of the policy leadership really that we're seeing from the European Union and from the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans. But hopefully it will also be something that is critical in other geographies where there's a push from the policy sector that we'll see maybe in, for example, on the other side of the Atlantics where I sit right now.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Vanessa. Well, Kingsmill, you were tracking bank customers before, and now you're tracking carbon. Is it a good description? Now, tell us something. What did you do before, and what made you go to carbon tracker?
Well, I've been a financial market analyst and strategist for most of my career, and what attracted to me to this extraordinary opportunity of the energy transition is two things. On the one hand, a quite legitimate desire to ensure that the world doesn't destroy itself, or at least be part of the movement which seeks to stop that. But at the same time, actually, just the intellectual realization that these new energy technologies were changing so quickly and costs were falling so fast and growth was happening so rapidly that it would create a very interesting disruptive environment, such as we're very accustomed to seeing in financial markets, where financial markets tend to react at tipping points. And it seemed to me a number of years ago that there were a series of tipping points coming in the energy system, which would drive disruption for the incumbents and also create huge new opportunities for the challengers, which is, I guess, why I'm here, because it seems to me that now is the most extraordinary opportunity, a kind of Cambrian moment, actually, for innovators and disruptors to flood into this new ecosystem which needs to be built.
Okay. Well, in your little CV, I found it says the energy transition is the most important driver of financial markets and so on. Well, isn't it the other way around? Aren't financial markets the biggest driver, meanwhile, for energy transition?
Well, these things, there is a degree of circularity nicely put. It's indeed the observation made by George Soros that he popularized, called reflexivity, whereby financial markets restrict the flow of capital into sunset industries and redirect capital into new industries. And you see that very, very clearly in the last 18 months, above all, with the collapse in the share prices of the fossil fuel sector and the extraordinary explosion in the share prices of a whole series of renewable energy stocks. And it's not just Tesla, it's the hydrogen stocks and the new energy ETF. So yeah, financial markets, as you say, have latched on to this opportunity, have seen it and are driving it even faster. But of course, it wouldn't have happened without technology. And I would suggest that technology lies at the heart of this shift. And that's why it's very interesting to be in your position, Andreas, where you can talk to the entrepreneurs and innovators actually making it happen.
Okay, well, thank you, Kingsmill. Well, okay, let's look at what's going on at your companies. Sophia, I mean, early this year, BP announced big plans, spectacular plans, I must say. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Okay, so we announced in February, actually before the COVID pandemic took hold, was that we would become a net zero company by 2050 or sooner, and we would help the world to get to net zero. Why are we making that claim? Yes, we have to fix our internal operations to make sure we take carbon out of our operations, but also out of the products and services that we deliver to customers. But also that we work out how do we improve people's lives, because it's not just around looking internally and taking carbon out, but how do we ensure that we are looking at new products and services that are relevant for the early adopters, but also that we push the mass market into new energy sources and new energy products and services, which we know is better for the planet. And again, during the pandemic, we've also seen customer attitudes shift somewhat. And actually, so, I mean, it's let's say, perfect time for us to be really, really focused and really re-engage with stakeholders, with the industry, with the ecosystem partners, to really help the small companies with the great ideas. But as we know, for instance, the electric car has been around since the 1830s, but it's only since Tesla and a few others in the last decade or so, which has really ramped up. We want to really crush that, let's say, gestation period for when we can get, let's say, mass market offers, technology-driven offers to market as quickly as we can. And that's what we're trying to do. And so in this new ecosystem, you need big companies too, because we have the scale, we have the wherewithal to help push change forward as well. And so we're on a journey. We don't have all the answers, like I said, but we're at the table and we're happy to listen and to help drive the agenda forward as well.
Well, actually, COVID, one could say, was the direct response to your plans in February, because you had some feedback and it helped for this year. Yeah. But next year, it might be difficult if you have increasing emissions again. Did you think about this, or how to communicate a comparison of the year 21 to 20, or is that not really an issue?
I mean, I think we're all concerned, obviously, about emissions going up and how do we curb that. But there is sort of a short-term, mid-term transition that companies like BP has to go through. We are committed to going through this as fast as we can. But you will see an acceleration of effort to bring the carbon intensity down far faster than even where we were a few years ago. So you may see in that shift, carbon intensity, not the place where we want it to be, but that's short term. We are committed to driving it down, not just in operations, but also in the products and services that we bring to market.
Okay. Well,
and working, partners like Microsoft, because it's not work in a vacuum.
Well, I like what you just said in your answer before. We don't have the answer yet, but we are on a journey. I think that's a very honest and necessary description of what's coming in the upcoming years. Sometimes I think it's difficult that some people try to explain the whole process until 2050 with the technologies we do already have. I think that can't really work, but that's maybe another issue. So, Vanessa, I mean, what about Microsoft? Also, I mean, very ambitious targets, or would you say they are ambitious, or could you describe them a bit?
Sure, thank you, and I really echo what Sophia said about the journey. It's we really speak in the same terms, and maybe that's one of the reasons when we decided to partner. We do have, I think, a vision statement that's quite similar. So in January, we made the commitment. Microsoft made the commitment to be carbon negative by 2030. And what do we mean by carbon negative? I think, that we always start there. Like we start with definition and also what is a good pathway. And that's where Carbon Tracker can keep us honest here. But, we've had companies saying, hey, I'm carbon neutral, I'm carbon zero. What does that mean? And what does it mean particularly for industries that are quite difficult when you look at their scope 1, 2, and 3 to assess what's the actual carbon footprint? But by deciding to go carbon negative, what we're betting on is to remove more carbon out of the atmosphere than we emit, than our operation and our scope 3, so our value chain is responsible for on a yearly basis by 2030. And in addition to that, we will remove all the carbon that Microsoft has been responsible for since its inception. So 45 years ago, feels odd to say that, but I guess they have founded in 1975, and by 2050. So that's, and our president, when we announced that, said it is a moonshot. It will require to partner with customers and industries, particularly obviously with the energy sector, which is why we're quite excited about our partnership with BP. And why did we shoot so big? First, because, and I think Kingsmill said it, the world need it. We need to be aggressively transitioning our economy to net zero to keep global warming to a 1.5 degree scenario. Second, we believe that there is an incredible business opportunity ahead of us, where data intelligence and optimization can contribute a lot, and where we can change, as we discussed earlier, our customers, our own behavior, like how we operate our own data centers, how we build the hardware that we sell, the Xbox or Surfaces, and how it's being used by our end consumers at the end of the day. But as Sophia said, it is a journey, and in fact, we have a good insight within how we delivered this moonshot is that we have 4 sprints. We've split kind of the year in there's 4 quarters. We have 4 sprints. We focus every quarter on 1 sprint, and it's carbon, waste, water, and ecosystem. But when we talk about these sprints, it's not just about a sprint. It's really about a marathon. And so I think of it as kind of a relay. So really like the metaphor of journey or sprints and marathon.
Okay. Well, I will get back to the carbon negative later on, but I think this is kind of very specific that you're really talking about off-takes from the atmosphere, as far as I understand. I will ask you, Kingsmill, later on about what you think about this. But maybe because you mentioned it, this scope 1, 2, 3, just quickly, briefly for the audience, could you just give us some hints for everybody so that we know what we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting because our executives had to get into the carbon accounting, which is not exactly a topic for everybody, but, and we even kind of did a video kind of explaining what scope 1, 2, and 3 is. But scope 1 is the direct emission. So obviously for a business like BP, that would be maybe one of their highest scope. Scope 3 will be your highest, but scope 1 would be bigger than for ourselves. For ourselves, it's about 100,000 metric ton of CO2. Scope 2 is the electricity we consume, which for data centers obviously is growing. So it has grown quite dramatically over the last 10 years. It's about 4 million metric ton for Microsoft. And scope 3 is all of the emissions that we're responsible for indirectly from our value chain, whether supply chain, whether end of use product, end of life for our products, use of our products, like as I mentioned, Xbox, So all of the gamers that are plugged in and consuming electricity to play the games, and really, I mean, and that's about 12 million for Microsoft metric ton of CO2, which altogether that's 16 million. That's, you know, a fraction of what BP likely reports, which is in the hundreds. I think I just reading it, it's about 400 metric ton, but it is still a huge effort. And I think we're all fighting with the same challenges in terms of getting to the right carbon tracking and accounting and transparency, in establishing the right baseline and measuring the progress in the right way, and figuring out these challenges and solving these challenges together is really what's exciting, and where we think there is a role for technology.
Okay, so we learned already something about two very different companies, about scope 1, 2, and 3. Kingsmill, I mean, you probably know many companies by now who are on their way here. So what do you think about what you just heard from your colleagues here?
Clearly, Microsoft, with its pledge to remove everything it's ever emitted, is exceptionally impressive. And I should say, I also salute Bernard Looney and what BP is now seeking to do. So clearly, within this panel, perhaps there's not so much room for disagreement. But I should say, and since you raised it, Andreas, earlier, there's this colossal amount of greenwashing obviously going on with plenty of other companies just talking the talk and pretending and ticking boxes and actually doing very little. And that's one of the issues that Carbon Track looks at. We try and figure out the companies which are suggesting that they're going to curtail emissions, but actually planning for ever increasing emissions nevertheless. And that's, I think, the really interesting point, fortunately, is that in the real thing that's forcing change, even amongst the laggards, is self-interest. Because of this very observation that you have these new energy technologies of solar and wind and batteries, and these increasing amounts of taxation and policy which are coming through. And what that means is that if you're a kind of dinosaur and you're stuck in the old world, pretending that you're changing and shifting to a new environment, you're actually going to be left high and dry. And for me, the best analogy is a little bit like thinking about the internet 20 years ago. I'm pretending to have an internet strategy, but not having one. It doesn't work. There's just no point. You've got to realize that the world is changing. You have to change with it. And unfortunately, it's this extremely powerful force of self-interest, which is increasingly driving companies to make the shift. And it's also driving financial markets, because investors are scared of having stocks in companies which will be destroyed by the energy transition. And they're scared of being involved with banks which will have bad loans and debt and stranded assets. So that's what I think increasingly we're focusing on at Carbon Track. And I think the other point I would make by way of observation is, if you read a lot of the academic literature on this stuff, and sitting in Oxford, I guess I can talk about this, read books like The Innovator's Dilemma, and it will tell you that actually incumbents really struggle with technology transitions. And actually, it's funny we should have Microsoft on this call, because Microsoft is one of the very perfect examples and unusual examples of a company which did manage to transition with the rise of the internet, and many other companies in its space failed to do so. So I think it's going to be very difficult for many incumbents. And if they want to survive, they've got to just get on with changing as fast as possible, which is why, again, what Bernard Looney is trying to do is very impressive at BP. But
I mean, okay, you said those two examples here, of course, are great, but there's also a lot of greenwashing out there. But how would one recognize the greenwashing here? I mean, as I see, there are some who are really putting technologies on the front, so reducing their own emissions here. Others are maybe just buying certificates, or is it just buying, or isn't it as good as well? Or others are even thinking about offtakes from the atmosphere. So, I mean, is there already some kind of rule? I read about these Oxford principles, but is there anything?
Indeed, the Oxford principles came out only last week. You've got to think about the perhaps, I don't know how well this translates into German, but the concept of cognitive dissonance, people saying one thing and doing another. and it applies, in our own lives, but it particularly applies to incumbent companies. And I don't want to mention names, but if you look at our website and Carbon Track, we've got plenty of oil companies which are talking about planting trees and actually planning on expanding their production of oil over the next decade, and that just makes absolutely no sense actually to do that. It's just actually bad business. So the answer again is that financial markets are very quickly figuring out who's not shifting and removing capital from those companies, and that's forcing increasingly company management teams to change their strategies. But you are going to have many giant casualties. I mean, just look at what's happened in one sector after another. Look at what happened to the European electricity sector 12 years ago, the global coal sector 8 years ago, the oil services sector 5 years ago, the oil sector today. What we see at Carbon Track is one sector after another being very rapidly derated and destroyed by the speed of change. And once more to emphasize, it's in people's interests to stop lying and actually get on with real change. And let's be clear, messing around with negative emissions is not a strategy, it's a tactic.
Okay, good. I mean,
if I can, Andreas, if I can just jump in here, I echo completely what Kingsmill has said, but I add that, as we pointed out, we're on a journey. Most companies, we haven't figured out all solutions. And I think different companies are at different point in their journey. And so, to be honest, Microsoft started to be carbon neutral in 2012, and we started by buying carbon offsets and, renewable energy certificates. And then as the markets matured, as the industry overall, the energy industry, the IT industry matured and became more aware of what can be done, we moved towards direct power purchases agreement of renewable energy. And now, as we see carbon removal technologies being available, not being deployed at scale and not at the right cost, obviously, we see an opportunity for Microsoft to invest in these technologies and procure carbon removals, metric ton of CO2 from these technologies. So, I think there's definitely a lot of greenwashing, but there's also making sure we take every company along that journey of education. And for us, as we're starting to work on Scope 3 and starting to work with our supply chain, we've been engaged with them on a number of issues, but really putting environment and carbon reduction at the center of the discussion with our suppliers, we'll have to take some of our suppliers through that journey, and it's not going to be a one-fits-all solution. Some of them are going to be able to sign PPAs. Some of them are not going to be able to sign PPAs. So it's also a dialogue.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
I think the challenge, you can imagine is for us, we have a huge, imagine for us, we have a huge journey. As Vanessa was commenting, we have to tackle around 415 million tons of emissions. So we have a huge gap that we have to close. And so for us, as well as you have commented, Kingsmill, we are having to accelerate our technology acquisition, look at partnerships, look at ecosystems. How can we do this faster? Because we know we don't have the answers all internally, but we have a big job to do, because just in terms of the upstream oil and gas, there's 360 million tons to remove, and we are committing to remove that very quickly. And so there is a lot, and probably faster than some companies, but I agree with you. I think the onus is on the oil and gas, and I think transparency, and I think not just customers, but organizations are holding companies to their word, and are going to keep are going to force us to keep our word as well. So I think it's only a good thing, the level of transparency now.
I have two questions here for you, Sophia, but I put it one after the other. First one is, so just maybe quick, the role of investors. Kingsmill mentioned the role of investors, and I met quite some big investors, and I heard that, of course, they do have all kind of books and questions before they invest nowadays. But what was the situation at BP? I guess, some of those investors might have been a bit confused, or was it, both? Some were pushing you, some were confused. Do you know anything about those directions?
No, I'm sorry, Andreas. No, I don't. I know. We've had recently what we call the BP Week, where we opened up to the investors and broader stakeholders our strategies, and we were able to articulate them as clearly as we can. But I'm not aware of a huge push. I mean, of course, investors will always keep asking us questions, which they are entitled to do. But for the most part, we have been quite transparent in terms of how we're going to approach this this big hill.
Okay, well, the second question is maybe also for the audience very interesting. The role of innovation. I mean, both of you have innovation in the title. So yes, tell us something about innovation and how do you do it? How do you find the proper innovations for your future? Well, I mean, just briefly.
Yeah, I mean, okay, let's give a small example. So one way we approach it, for instance, is we take we define the problem, where the area that we go after, potentially look for solutions. Maybe we don't know exactly what the answer is, but let's say we're looking for a much more a lower infrastructure intensive electric charging infrastructure solution that we could put onto gas stations or put into infrastructure, roll out electric vehicle charging infrastructure faster. So we invested small venture capital into a little startup in California called FreeWire. They had a little mobile charging unit, which we helped them pivot into what was a dual unit called Boost Charge, which is a battery plus a charger, which actually can be installed onto forecourts and onto sites a lot more efficiently. So the whole installation, the whole turnkey is a lot faster and a lot cheaper. That for me is innovation, because it's taken a problem, which is how do we get more charging available to EV drivers and EVs at as many points as possible to encourage adoption, encourage people to switch. But how do we do that in a way that doesn't break the bank, but enables us to offer more charging in more places? So that's, for me, is innovation. It's taking sometimes small being very clear what your problem statement is, but perhaps sometimes looking at it, investing in a small company and helping them pivot, and then helping them because we've got the sites and the land and the space that you can actually do charging in. So that's one way you can look at innovation, but it's really, at the end of the day, it's delivering something that's of value to the customer and delivering that as efficiently as possible, because it's been the barrier, one of the main barriers why some of the sustainable energy products and services haven't been able to come to market until now. It's that people don't want to pay for it. Customers don't want to pay for it. And it's how do we deliver technology that's meaningful and people see the value in it, or that we deliver it as cost effectively as possible. So that's the sort of tension that I think if you solve that, you are an innovator.
Yeah, okay, but well, first you have to have a look at the 3 finalists in the mobility sector. There's one, okay, I think you will best, I'm pretty sure. And the other is, so I understand, so you come from the customer perspective, you see the new needs of those customers, and then you have some innovation scouting and look around, what kind of innovation could be established in our company and make it bigger. So somehow, like this, that's one road for innovation at BP.
And that's a very sort of what I call it's near in. It's a bit iterative, yeah. But let's give an example. So you've got an industry, vertical farming, that's out there. How do you look at that, how they've solved that issue around using less energy, using less water to create food? How can we apply that insight to create something more disruptive in terms of the way we generate energy or distribute energy? So that's another way of looking at innovation, which is beyond necessarily a narrow problem statement.
Okay, good. Thank you, Vanessa. But how is it at Microsoft? I mean, of course, you have all these, what is it, action center in English, these centers for data centers. Of course, it's, I mean, one thing, but then you also offer products
yes,
to help being efficient. What's your role over here when it comes to innovation?
Well, first let me say innovation is quite a mantra when you're sitting at home with 18 months kid in the background. So let's breathe and live it. But that's, I think I love what Kingsmill said about the innovator's dilemma. And I think at Microsoft, obviously, we're very aware of that, being a 40 years old company now and still being in the software, but having embraced kind of some of the hardware with the data center transition or add-on to our business. Many of the technologies that will be critical to meet the energy transition or to put the world on a 1.5 degree world already exist. I think the IEA just came out with a report last week about the importance of deployment of solar industry. Solar industry has been deployed for more than 50 years, and the ramping has been dramatic. But we believe that we have a role, particularly in scaling up maybe some of the solutions that are not yet at that kind of perfect scale and perfect kind of price point that Sophia was talking about. And so that's where we decided to create this $1 billion fund called the Climate Innovation Fund that will really focus on the scalability issue, on climate impact, climate equity, and obviously looking at energy systems and how energy systems, the decarbonization of energy systems can be accelerated is fundamental. We will also invest, obviously, as I mentioned, on carbon removal technologies, and we just announced, for example, an investment on Carbon Cure, which developed a technology that introduces recycled CO2 into concrete to reduce the carbon footprint of concrete. And if you look at kind of the key drivers of CO2 emissions globally, it's the energy sector, the housing, and the transportation sector. If you tackle these three, we've gone a long way. And obviously, because we are a digital company and we are working with our data centers on cloud innovation, we believe there's a key role for data intelligence and optimization driven by machine learning and artificial intelligence. And I don't want to throw this just kind of as a buzzword, but there's just a lot of better intelligence that's required kind of throughout all of our systems. And, I started talking about the data quality that underpins all of the company's commitments. Well, that's a data problem that can be improved dramatically with machine learning and AI. If we think about energy system and the decentralization of energy system and the fact that we all dream of a fully flexible with integrated demand response and a prosumer, that would really be the goal. Like, I'd like to be able to know when to charge my computer, when it will be running on zero energy power. And these are things that we want to work on. Like, okay, you're a gamer. We want to tell you, hey, if you charge your Xbox at this time, or if you play this game at this time, or if you play this game versus that game, your carbon footprint is going to be more or less good.
I have to stop you because you will probably get 100 applications from startups now, and if you talk longer, it will be 200, and you can't work. So,
well, that's what we want, So
things that keeps on coming. Well, I mean. Do you see that these ambitions those companies nowadays have? Well, do you see they are a driver also for innovation? Well, I guess it's a stupid question. Huh? Probably yes.
No. Well, as they say, there is no such thing as a stupid question, Andreas. Particularly the CEO of the German Energy Agency, so I would not dare say that. No. I think joking aside. There is one point I would try and I think we should make in the middle of this very positive conversation, which is that it is absolutely axiomatic that change is driven by insurgents, not by incumbents. In this or in any transition, it was Microsoft 47 years ago that took over from IBM. It was Google that provides our search services. It's Amazon that provides our internet shopping, and so on and so forth. And actually, for your startups. Now, the main point I would mention is, don't sell up too soon or too cheap, because actually you could be the next company which takes advantage of this Cambrian disruption and creates vast new opportunities. what one should be looking to insurgents to drive change. And then the other point that really holds back incumbent industries as a rule is that so much of their expertise and capital is already tied up in the old system. They as a rule, again, present company being the exception, I guess, find it very, very hard to migrate their capital and their expertise to the new world. And to give you one famous example, just 1% of the investment in wind and solar at the moment comes from the oil and gas sector. So that's not to criticize the oil and gas sector in particular, but it's just really to say that this is an incredible transformation which is being driven by a whole series of new companies, and we should expect the growth to come from them. If I may make one other point, about what we have to achieve as a society and the necessity for urgency in this shift is, if we want to have a chance of getting to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, we need to halve within 10 years our carbon emissions from 33 gigatons, where it is 18 gigatons, by 2030. And that really requires very radical rethinking the way we do everything. And you're going to increasingly see governments now getting behind serious change. President Xi in China now saying China's going to get to net zero by 2060, net zero by 2050 for carbon potentially. The European Union, one hopes a new administration in the United States will get behind change as well. I mean, it's going to be a lot of government action driving change as well as technology. And then that gives once more a fantastic opportunity for startups.
Yes, well, this is my wish. Next meeting here will be with Joe Biden, Ursula von der Leyen, and Xi Jinping, and we will moderate the future of climate change.
Bravo.
So you guys have to help me to get them on board here. But let's get back. And we have another few minutes. Well, I think many incumbents understood this. So I wonder whether that's still true that, incumbents won't change. I see in Germany at least some of the energy incumbents did change quite well. Now they're much smaller than they were before, and they changed in a dramatically way, and their business models are very different now. So there is change is possible. We can already see from the experience we had with energy transition and climate change. Maybe not as quick as we would wish here. Maybe one last little round here on the customers here. Are the customers, Sophia, maybe you want to start, asking for climate solutions, or do you still have to convince them?
It depends on where you live in the world, and depends on, so if you have pollution at your doorstep affecting your family, you are wanting change faster. If it's more insidious, if it comes at a cheaper price, then people are happy to adopt. And so the onus is on companies like ours, like Microsoft, like others, to really help drive and help push that behavioral change throughout the world, as long as people can still have access to reliable and affordable energy and be able to develop and fulfill all their needs. But it's a mixed bag, but it's possible depending on where you are in the world.
Well, what about you, Vanessa? I guess many of your customers do ask for those solutions, but enough already, or would you wish even more?
Yeah, I think so, Sophia. First, that's a great question, and I think Sophia responded very similar. I would respond. It's very different depending on the geographic basis. European companies have been leaders in asking about climate mitigation and adaptation solutions and digital transformation, particularly in the energy sector. And then we partnered with BP, a European-based company, and a few others that are also European-based. It might be linked to kind of the policy framework that Kingsmill just talked about, particularly in this side of the pond. But then I think it is also about us, to make sure that our offering and the solution that we can bring to customers to solve the problems that they're not even necessarily thinking about but at the end of the day, that can improve their bottom line, because if you talk about energy efficiency and optimizing the refinery of the future or optimizing the manufacturing of the future, that will benefit the bottom line of these industries. So it's also making sure that we have our story right about what's the opportunity with climate change mitigation adaptation technologies.
Okay, thank you. René and Alex, if you hear me, I beg you not to kick me out, because I have a question from the audience. I will read it out to you, Sophia, and then I have the final say from Kingsmill later on. And you must know that I'm the boss of Alex and René, so they won't stop us too early. I hope, but you never know. So, Sophia, I applaud BP's industry-leading net zero goal by 2050, they say. As you know, Scope 3 tailpipe emissions represent 90% of BP's total emissions, and the greatest challenge cost in realizing that target. There will be hundreds of millions of ICE vehicles on the road to transitioning to clean transport, EVs, etc. In this interim, how can your customers take responsible actions to mitigate or compensate for their own Scope 3 carbon dioxide footprints, particularly from use of carbon-based road fuels? Oh, that's a long and complicated question.
That's a lot. Well, okay, I'll give a short answer. So first, we encourage people to look at different modes of transport which are less carbon intensive. So get out of your car, get on a bike, get on a public transport. There are ways you can reduce your total carbon footprint for your journeys, and rethink those journeys. Maybe not every journey is required, or switch to EVs faster, switch to a different form. If you can't switch to an ICE car right away, move to a hybrid, but try as fast as you can to move to a cleaner form of transport. There are, from next year, I think, many more affordable options. And not even buying. You can rent, you can lease, but there are ways you can do it as a consumer to rethink the way that you consume fuel to get on your journey. And also as well, the way you have convenient food and product delivered to you. We think that you don't need to have 15 Amazon journeys to deliver the same, to deliver different products to you. See how you as well can also reduce the amount of journeys that bring products and services to you at home or at workplaces.
I like that idea. So think mobility different in different ways. Actually, lots of possibilities. Very last question to Kingsmill. Well, I mean, we always read about companies with net zero emission plans and so on. So one could get the impression, oh wow, there's a great thing going on. I mean, almost 90% of our companies are already having plans. Well, I mean, what's the truth?
Well, the truth is very shocking, actually, sadly. And you see the truth if you read the IEA's World Energy Outlook for their business as usual forecast for the future, which is that emissions are flat at 33 gigatons from the energy sector for the next 20 years. So we are by no means out of the wood, and this out of the woods, as they say, we're nowhere near achieving what we need to achieve. That's why we actually need very radical change. And if I may say, there's two big grounds for hope for us. One is the observation that fossil fuel demand has almost certainly peaked in 2019. It's now going to plateau, and then it's going to fall off a cliff, as we've seen now with coal. And that then drives capital out of the sector and drives change in and of itself. And then the other observation is the emerging market energy leapfrog. So Vanessa very correctly pointed out that we love in Europe to talk about carbon emissions, but it's not necessarily top of mind in many other regions. But fortunately, the price of solar, and you can basically get solar electricity in India today at $30, which is cheaper than the grid price of coal. You're about to have electric vehicles at $100 per kilowatt hour by the end of this year, if we are to believe the great Elon Musk, which makes it basically cheaper than conventional cars. And that therefore means that actually, if you're a policymaker in India or China or Southeast Asia now today, and you're searching for for how to build out your energy system over the next 20, 30 years, and don't forget that's where all the growth is meant to be coming from, you're actually going to be choosing these new energy technologies. And that, I think, is great grounds for hope.
Good. Thank you, Kingsmill. Well, we are over time here, but there's just one homework for you guys. Have a look at our startups and invest, all right? 3 would be fine. each of you 3 startups, that would be great. And that
Okay.
homework for our startups, think global. I think that was a very, very interesting discussion. I liked it a lot. You're great persons, great engaged enthusiasts, and it was a very big pleasure to talk to you, and it all went well. Thank you very much, and all the best. See you again after the COVID crisis, and if earlier, then digital again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you, Andreas.
So I guess somebody will